Lynn slumped against the wall of her cramped living pod, exhausted after another long shift at the spaceport. The recycled air tasted stale and the ever-present hum of the station's life support systems grated on her nerves. She rubbed her temples, trying to ease the tension headache building behind her eyes. Ping! Her wristcom lit up with an incoming message from Max's school. What had he done this time? Skipped class to race drones in the zero-G core again? Hacked the station's vending machines? She sighed and tapped the message. Ms. Harlow, your son failed to attend school today. Please contact us immediately to discuss truancy prevention measures. Lynn's heart sank. Things had been rough since her husband died in that shuttle accident 2 years ago. She'd picked up extra shifts to make ends meet, leaving Max alone more than she liked. Guilt gnawed at her. She had to find him. Max, she called out, her voice echoing in the small space. No response. Worry rising, she checked his room. Empty. His few possessions were scattered haphazardly, but his prized model starship was missing from its shelf. A scrap of paper on his unmade bed caught her eye. Lynn snatched it up, her hands shaking as she read the hastily scrawled words, "Off to see the stars. Don't look for me." Panic seized her. He'd run away. Why? Things had been hard lately with her long hours and his acting out, but she never imagined this. Frantic, Lynn sent messages to Max's few friends, but no one had seen him. She pulled up the station security logs on her wristcom, scanning for any sign of her son. There. Camera 47B near the docks showed Max sneaking aboard a battered cargo ship 3 hours ago. The ship's manifest scrolled across the screen, the MSV Hermes, bound for the distant Epsilon Eridani system with a hold full of mining equipment. Lynn's blood ran cold. Stowing away on an interstellar freighter was incredibly dangerous. What if he got caught? Or hurt? Or, worse? She had to go after him. Lynn hastily threw some clothes and supplies into a pack. She'd have to leave her job, abandon what little stability they had. But what choice did she have? She couldn't lose Max. He was all she had left. Lynn raced to the docks, dodging around the colorful throngs of people from 100 different worlds. Neon signs flickered and tantalizing scents from food carts drifted by, but she barely noticed. All that mattered was getting to Max. She skidded to a halt outside Docking Bay 94, where the Hermes had been berthed, her heart hammering. But the bay was empty, the ship gone. Lynn frantically scanned the departure logs. The Hermes had left 20 minutes ago. Max was already speeding toward the stars, light years beyond her reach. She fought down despair. She had to find a way to go after him. But how? She couldn't afford a ticket on a passenger liner, and the waiting list for colonist berths was months long. Lynn racked her brain. There had to be a way. And then it hit her. Rick. Her guts twisted at the thought of her ex, but he had his own small ship. He'd won it in some shady card game. If she could convince him to let her borrow it. Or steal it if she had to. Lynn set her jaw. She'd do whatever it took to get Max back, even if it meant trekking across the galaxy. Or facing Rick. Max was out there somewhere among the stars and she would find him, no matter the cost. She headed for the cheap flophouse where Rick holed up these days when he was between smuggling runs, a plan already forming in her mind. One way or another, she was going to get that ship. Staring up at the cold, distant stars through the grimy window, Lynn whispered a promise into the uncaring void. I'm coming, Max, whatever it takes, I'll find you. I'll bring you home. She turned and marched into the neon-soaked depths of the station, her love for her son a bright flame driving her on. She didn't yet realize that she was taking the first steps on a journey that would change the course of star systems. At that moment, she was just a desperate mother fighting to reach her child. One foot in front of the other, Lynn began her long quest into the black. The seedy underbelly of the space station closed in around Lynn as she hurried through the dimly lit alleys. The acrid stench of cheap stims and recycled sweat assaulted her nose. Raucous laughter and pounding music spilled from grimy bars where spacers drowned their sorrows in synthahol and dice games. Lynn kept her head down and one hand on the knife hidden in her jacket pocket, just in case. This was the kind of place where you minded your own business if you knew what was good for you. Hunger gnawed at her, but she didn't dare stop for food. Every second counted. She found Rick's flophouse tucked away in a particularly grungy corner, between a noisy machine shop and a boarded-up pawnbroker. The flickering sign over the door read, "Slice Rooms," in half-burnt-out letters. Lynn's lip curled in disgust, but she shoved through the door anyway. A pungent blast of unwashed bodies and stale alcohol made her eyes water. The bleary-eyed clerk at the front desk barely glanced up from his holozine as she strode past, heading for the narrow stairs. She'd been here before, back when she and Rick were together. Room 308, at the end of the hall. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she climbed, the loose coins in her pocket clinking with each step. Would Rick even be here? If he was, would he help her? The man had a mercurial temper at the best of times. Lynn paused outside the door, taking a deep breath to steel herself, then knocked twice. Shuffling sounds came from inside, then the door slid open a crack. Rick's bloodshot eyes glared out at her. "Lynn?" he rasped, his gravelly voice roughened by years of cheap tobacco. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I need your help," Lynn said, hating the pleading note in her voice. "It's Max. He's run away on a star freighter. I have to go after him." Rick barked a harsh laugh. "Kid finally got tired of your nagging, huh?" "Can't say I blame him." Lynn clenched her fists, bile rising in her throat. "Rick, please. He's only 12. He could get hurt or worse out there. I need to borrow your ship to go find him." Rick's eyes narrowed. "You mean the ship you walked out on me to get away from?" "Not a chance, sweetheart. I've got a sweet smuggling gig lined up. Pays enough to keep me in booze and blondes for months. Find your brat on your own time." He moved to slam the door, but Lynn jammed her foot in the gap. Desperation made her reckless. "You owe me, Rick. I'm calling in that favor." Years ago, Lynn had taken the rap for one of Rick's smuggling schemes gone wrong to keep him out of the asteroid mines. She'd sworn never to bring it up again, but she was out of options. Rick's face mottled with fury. "Why, you ungrateful little. I don't owe you squat." He raised a fist and Lynn tensed, ready to dodge the coming blow. But then his shoulders slumped and he stepped back, deflating like a punctured exosuit. "Fine. Take the damn ship. But you scratch that paint job and there'll be hell to pay, you hear?" Relief crashed through Lynn, making her knees weak. "Thank you, Rick. I mean it. I'll get her back to you safe." "Yeah, well, don't go getting all misty on me." Doc 87. Access codes 48915. Now scram before I change my mind. Lynn turned and sprinted down the hall, her boots pounding on the gritty deck. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen a flicker of something that looked almost like concern in Rick's bloodshot eyes before the door slid shut. 20 minutes later, Lynn stood on the docks again, a hastily packed duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a stolen ship access card clutched in her trembling hand. The small craft ahead of her looked like little more than a rust bucket, but the Warp Turtle, as Rick whimsically called it, had a Class 3 hyperdrive, more than fast enough to catch a lumbering or freighter. Lynn glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then hurried up the access ramp. The cockpit smelled of stale smoke and cheap whiskey, but the controls were blessedly familiar. She'd spent countless hours in this pilot's seat, ferrying dubiously legal cargo across the quadrant. With a deep breath, Lynn powered up the engines. The ship hummed to life around her, displays flickering on and the deck vibrating underfoot. She reached for the launch lever, but hesitated, her hand hovering above the worn grip. Was she really about to steal a ship and go herring off across the galaxy after Max? It was madness. But then she thought of her son, scared and alone on that decrepit freighter. Lynn's jaw clenched. Yes. Yes, she was. She grabbed the lever and pushed it forward. The ship lurched as the docking clamps disengaged, then the warp turtle leapt into open space, streaking past the glittering station rings. Lynn punched in the coordinates for Epsilon Eridani and engaged the hyperdrive. The stars blurred into streaks of light and then with a stomach-churning wrench, the ship jumped to warp. As the swirling colors of hyperspace filled the viewscreen, Lynn settled back in the pilot's chair, adrenaline still singing through her veins. She'd done it. She was on her way. Hang on, Max, she thought fiercely. I'm coming. The vast, cold expanse of the galaxy stretched out before her, stars glittering in the endless black. Somewhere among them was her son. And come hell or high water, she would find him. Lynn's hands tightened on the controls as the warp turtle hurtled into the void. The swirling maelstrom of hyperspace gave way to the blackness of normal space as the warp turtle dropped out of FTL near the Epsilon Eridani system. A binary star glowed at the heart of a glittering web of planets and asteroid belts. Lynn checked the NAV computer. The Hermes' last registered trajectory would take it right through this system on the way to the mining colonies on the frontier. With luck, she could catch up to the freighter before it reached the hyper-limit on the far side. She pushed the throttle forward, sending the warp turtle speeding toward the inner planets. Hours ticked by as Lynn scanned the busy shipping lanes for any sign of the Hermes. Massive in-system freighters lumbered by, their holds filled with grain and ore from the outer planets. Sleek passenger liners flashed past, ferrying the wealthy to luxury resorts on tropical moons. But no battered mid-range cargo ship appeared. Worry gnawed at Lynn's gut. What if the Hermes had already come and gone? What if the captain had discovered Max and thrown him in the brig, or worse? The image of her son, alone and scared in some dark hold, made her heart clench. Ping! An alert flashed on the sensor console. A ship matching the Hermes profile had just dropped out of warp on the edge of the system, heading for the fueling depot orbiting the third planet. Relief crashed through Lynn. She still had time. She angled the warp turtle toward the rust-red world, its barren plains scoured by ancient meteor strikes. The fueling depot loomed larger as Lynn approached, a sprawling tangle of docking arms and habitat modules circling the equator of the rust-red planet. Ships of every size and description clung to its structure like barnacles, taking on fuel and supplies for the long haul across the stars. Lynn scanned the registry beacon, searching for the Hermes ID code. There. The old freighter was nestled in a docking bay on the far side of the station, wedged between a bulk ore carrier and a fleet of robotic tugs. She angled the warp turtle toward an open bay a few segments away. The sooner she got aboard and found Max, the better. As she eased the ship into the docking clamps, Lynn's wristcom pinged with an incoming message. Her heart leapt, could it be Max? But no, the ID code was for system traffic control. Lynn's brow furrowed as she tapped the message open. What could they want? She'd filed her docking request and paid the fees. The message made her blood run cold. Freighter Hermes placed under lockdown by order of Sirius Corporation Security. Suspected contraband detected. All crew and passengers to remain aboard pending search. Lynn cursed under her breath. Corporate security? What kind of contraband could the Hermes be carrying? Stolen or, maybe black market weapons? Whatever it was, a search would almost certainly find Max. And a stowaway kid on a ship smuggling who knows what. Her imagination conjured a host of nightmarish outcomes, each worse than the last. She had to get him off that ship, fast, before the troops arrived. Lynn grabbed her duffel and hurried out the airlock, sealing the warp turtle behind her. The docks bustled with activity as spacers and crew rushed to and fro, but an undercurrent of tension ran through the crowds. News of the lockdown was spreading. Lynn pushed her way through the throng, eyes fixed on the distant bulk of the Hermes. If she could just get to Max before. Halt. Serious security. This is a restricted area. Armored figures poured from hatches along the docks, pulse rifles at the ready. Dock workers and spacers scattered before them, abandoning crates and equipment in their haste to clear out. The troops quickly formed a cordon, blocking the accessways to the impounded ships. Lynn's heart sank. She was too late. The Hermes was already surrounded, its crew no doubt being marched out for questioning. And Max was still trapped on board. Desperation clawed at her throat. She had to find a way past that cordon. You there. Halt and present ID. A hulking trooper leveled his rifle at Lynn, visor glinting beneath the harsh dock lights. Lynn froze, mind racing. If they scanned her ID, they'd know she wasn't crew. She'd be detained for questioning, maybe even arrested. Precious time she couldn't afford to waste while Max was in danger. She had to bluff her way through. Whoa, easy there, Chief. She threw up her hands, forcing a nonchalant grin. No need to point that thing. I'm just a deck monkey, see? She jerked a thumb at the logo on her jacket, a stylized wrench she'd had stitched there back when she worked maintenance between smuggling gigs. Got a work order for the Hermes. Gotta swap a busted coupling afore they boost out. The trooper's rifle didn't waver. All maintenance is suspended. Captain's orders. Step back. Lynn forced a put-upon sigh. Come on, buddy. You know how much a blown coupling costs to fix in the black. Ol' skipper'll have my ass if I don't get it done. She made a show of trying to step around the guard. Lemme just dash. I said step back. The trooper shoved her, hard. Lynn staggered, almost falling. You deaf or just stupid? Ain't nobody sets foot on the Hermes, till the captain says so. Anger flashed through Lynn, hot and bright. She wanted to scream that her son was on that ship, that she had to get to him. But she bit it back. Yelling would only get her stunned and thrown in the brig. She needed to stay free and find another way onto that freighter. She threw up her hands in mock surrender, backing away. All right, I'm goin'. Sheesh, try to do a guy a favor. The trooper just glared, rifle still trained on her as she turned and slouched off into the crowd. Lynn's mind raced as she threaded her way through the milling spacers and gawkers. The main accessways were blocked, but maybe she could find another route. An emergency airlock or a maintenance hatch, something the guards might have missed. And then a snippet of overheard conversation made her freeze in her tracks. Heard they're looking for a kid, some stowaway brat. Captain wants him found afore the suits come snooping, else there'll be hell to pay. Ice flooded Lynn's veins. They knew about Max. They were searching for him. And if the crew found him before she did? The fear that had driven Lynn across the stars crystallized into cold, sharp-edged fury. To hell with the guards and to hell with laying low. She was done skulking and sneaking. That was her boy they were hunting, and by God, she would tear the station apart bulkhead by bulkhead to get to him. Lynn turned on her heel, shoving back through the crowd toward the guarded ships. Let them try to stop her. She was done asking permission. One way or another, she was getting on that freighter. And God help anyone who stood in her way. Lynn stalked through the crowded docks, purpose quickening her steps. The armored cordon around the impounded ships loomed ahead, unyielding as a wall. She couldn't force her way through, not without risking arrest or worse. She needed another way in. Her gaze darted over the sleek hulls and umbilical gantries, searching for inspiration. There, a narrow accessway, half hidden behind a tangle of fuel lines. More of a crawlspace than a proper corridor, probably used by maintenance drones. But it ran right under the Hermes docking arm. If she could get inside. Lynn glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then ducked into the shadows of the fuel lines. The crawlspace was a tight fit, all sharp edges and snarled cables. The reek of spilled hydraulic fluid burned her nose. She squirmed forward, elbows and knees scraping painfully against the metal. The duct ended in a grill set into the decking under the Hermes berth. Lynn peered through, heart pounding. Booted feet rushed by overhead as the crew searched for Max. She caught snatches of barked orders and terse replies. Check the cargo bays again. That brat's gotta be here somewhere. Serious goons are gettin' antsy. They're gonna breach any minute. Found the kid yet? Cap'll space us all if the suits get hold of him first. Lynn's blood ran cold. The noose was tightening. She had to find Max, fast, before either the crew or the security troops did. The grill was locked, but the mechanism was old and corroded. Lynn drew her multi-tool and set to work, ears straining for any sound of discovery. The seconds crawled by as she fiddled with the rusted bolts, every creak of metal sending her heart into her throat. Just a little more. There. The grill swung open with a protesting squeal. Lynn froze, hardly daring to breathe, but no cry of alarm followed. She pulled herself up and out, rolling into a crouch on the decking. The docking arm stretched out ahead, all rust-stained metal and hissing conduits. But no sign of Max. Lynn crept forward, keeping low. Shouts and pounding feet echoed from within the ship, the crew's search efforts redoubling. Where would a scared kid hide on a freighter like this? The life pods? The cargo hold? Engineering? She had to think like Max, get inside his head. What had he been looking for when he ran away? And then it hit her. The stars. Max had always been obsessed with the stars, ever since he was old enough to toddle up to the observation deck back home. Off to see the stars, his note had said. Of course. He'd be looking for a place with a view. Lynn veered off, hurrying past pressure-locked hatches and warning signs. There, up ahead, an access ladder, leading up to a small observation blister atop the freighter's hull. The Hermes was an old ship, they'd had those back before full-spectrum view screens became standard. Max just might have found it. She swarmed up the ladder, palms slick with sweat on the rungs. As her head cleared the hatch, her heart nearly stopped. There, huddled against the blister's curving window, was Max. He whipped around at the sound of her entrance, eyes wide and terrified in his pale face. Mom? His voice cracked on the word, half disbelief, half desperate hope. Max. Lynn lunged forward, gathering her son into a bone-crushing hug. Tears burned her eyes as she held him tight, his thin shoulders shaking under her hands. What were you thinking? I was so scared. I'm sorry, he mumbled into her shoulder, his own tears soaking through her shirt. I just wanted to see the stars up close. Like Dad always talked about. Grief and understanding pierced Lynn in equal measure. Oh, Max. A sudden bang from below made them both jump. Shouts, pounding feet on the decks. The angry bark of pulse rifles. The security team had breached the ship. Where's the brat? A rough voice bellowed. Tear this scow apart. Max shrank against her, shaking. Lynn tightened her grip on him, mind racing. They were trapped up here. The troops would be on them any second. There was nowhere to run. And then her gaze fell on the life pod hatch set into the wall, its control panel glowing softly in the dimness. No. It was insane. The pods were designed for dire emergencies, not impromptu escapes. But what choice did they have? It was that or let Max fall into the hands of the serious goons or the angry crew. Max, listen to me. Lynn took his face in her hands, locking eyes with him. We're going to get in that pod. I need you to be brave for me, okay? Max swallowed hard, then nodded. Lynn could see the trust in his eyes, bright beneath the fear. Trust in her. She grabbed his hand and pulled him into the pod, sealing the hatch behind them. The pod was barely big enough for two, a cramped bubble of metal and plexiglass. Lynn's fingers flew over the control panel, heart in her throat. One wrong move and they'd be flash-fried by thruster wash or smeared across the docking arm. But sometimes, you just had to leap and trust in the stars. Lynn hit the release and the pod burst free with a bone-jarring lurch. Max cried out, clinging to her as the tiny craft spun end over end, narrowly missing the freighter's hull. For a heart-stopping moment, Lynn thought they'd smash into the docking arm, but then the pod's emergency thrusters kicked in, stabilizing their wild tumble. The pod careened away from the ship, Max's pale face pressed to the viewport, taking in the glittering expanse of the fueling depot below and the star-speckled void beyond. Despite the terror of the moment, Lynn saw a glimmer of wonder in his eyes as he stared out at the infinite black. He had gotten his wish, he was seeing the stars, closer than ever before. Shouts crackled over the comm as the Hermes crew realized their quarry had slipped the net. Lynn jabbed the pod's manual controls, sending them corkscrewing away from the ship. They had to get out of weapons range before. A bright lance of light seared past, close enough to rattle the pod's frame. Pulse fire. The security troops were shooting at them. Max screamed, burying his face in Lynn's chest. She wrapped her arms around him, frantically working the controls with one hand. The pod wove and jinked as Lynn poured on the speed, more shots flashing by on all sides. If even one of those beams hit them, they'd be nothing but glowing shrapnel. The pod's hull pinged and rattled as near misses superheated the metal. Almost there, almost there. And then, with a suddenness that made them both gasp, they were out, clear of the cordon's range. The parting shots faded behind them as Lynn angled the pod down toward the rust-red curve of the planet below. They'd done it. They'd escaped. Max lifted his head, blinking back tears as he stared out at the stars. Lynn hugged him tighter, pressing a kiss to his hair. They had a lot to talk about, a lot to work through. But for now, they were together, and they were safe. That was all that mattered. The pod streaked down into the planet's atmosphere, the friction of re-entry enveloping them in a cocoon of fire. Lynn held Max close as the flames danced, feeling the weight of his trust, and the greater weight of her love for him. Sometimes, that love meant holding tight. And sometimes, it meant leaping into the void, with no safety net but each other. As the pod plunged on toward an unknown future, Lynn made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or dangers they faced, she would be there for Max. They would face it together, hand in hand, eyes fixed on the stars. She'd thought she needed a ship or a blaster to save him. But in the end, all she'd needed was the fierceness of a mother's love, and the courage to leap into the black. Lynn and Max trekked across the barren landscape, the binary stars sliding slowly overhead. The ground was treacherous, littered with loose scree and pockmarked with craters. They kept a steady pace, conserving their strength and their precious supplies. As they walked, they talked, really talked, for the first time in what felt like years. Max opened up about his loneliness, his struggles in school, his desperate desire to see the stars as his father had. Lynn listened, her heart aching, and shared her own fears and regrets. The kilometers fell away beneath their feet, the weight of unspoken words lifting with each step. On the second day, they crested a rise and saw the mining outpost glinting in the distance, a cluster of prefab buildings huddled against the base of a rugged cliff. Lynn nearly wept at the sight. They stumbled into the outpost on trembling legs, exhausted and parched. The miners took them in, wide-eyed at their sudden appearance. Over cups of recycled water, Lynn told their story. The miners listened, shaking their heads in amazement. "You've been through the ringer, you too," the foreman said. "But you're safe now. We'll get you on the next transport out." A week later, Lynn and Max stood on the outpost's small landing pad, watching as a Sirius Corporation shuttle settled onto the scorched earth. The ramp lowered, revealing a familiar figure. "Mom!" Max broke into a run. Lynn's sister caught him in a tearful hug, her worried face breaking into a smile. "Don't you ever scare us like that again," she scolded, pulling Lynn into the embrace. "When I got your message." "I know," Lynn murmured. "I'm sorry. But I had to find him. I had to bring him home." Her sister nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You did good, Lynn. You both did." They boarded the shuttle, Max bouncing with excitement as he peppered the pilot with questions. Lynn watched him, love and pride swelling in her chest. As the shuttle lifted off, the red planet falling away beneath them, Lynn took Max's hand and pointed out the viewport. "Look," she whispered. "The stars." Max leaned forward, face glowing in the starlight. After a moment, he turned to Lynn, his smile brighter than any sun. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. "For coming for me. For bringing me home." Lynn pulled him close, blinking back tears. "Always, kiddo. No matter how far, no matter what it takes. I'll always be there. I'll always bring you home." The shuttle curved up and away, carrying the little family back to the stars, and to a future bright with promise. A future they would face hand in hand, hearts bound by a love that crossed the universe itself.